Mone, professor at India State University here in Tbilisi, and I have the great pleasure and honor to moderate this panel, which has great three presenters who will have 20 minutes each, and afterwards we will have 30 minutes of discussion. First presenter today, what I wanted also to mention for the introduction of our topic of this panel, the EU's normative impact, asymmetrical power and local Europeans' different Europeanness, is that last week I attended the Jean Monnet annual conference in Brussels, where we discussed the new EU global strategy on foreign and security policy. And the buzzword, the word mostly used there was resilience. And it fits very much to what I'm expecting here to listen to from our presenters today. Because what does resilience mean in the eastern neighborhood, or a country like Georgia or others? So I would like to introduce Neil McFarlane, who has a long track record, not only at the University of Oxford, but also in collaborating in international relations with the Center for Social Studies and Tbilisi State University. And he will talk about the European Union and the Eastern neighborhood, normative power in a contested space. Please, Neil.
Thank you very much, Oliver. And I should say I'm very grateful to Nika Diana, the Center for Social Sciences, and of course the funders for inviting me all the way from Boston, where I am at the moment. It's also very nice to be back at TSU. My last topic here in the summer was Brexit. And so now we have a more cheerful topic. This presentation draws on a much larger project that I've been doing with a colleague at King's College London, Anna Menon, and that is about to go out for review. But several of the issues arising are issues that I develop more here. And I should say, for the benefit of the translator, if I'm going too quickly, just wave at me, okay? Both Anand and I were generally skeptical of the evolving EU process to develop a foreign and security policy and a security and defense policy. Now I'll discuss our skepticism further below. We were particularly doubtful of the conceptualization of European power in the international system. In my case, that reflected in particular my sense that we were all wrong in our interpretation of Russia. And in my case, that really goes back about 25 years. Then, of course, like everybody else, we witnessed the outcome of the Vilnius Partnership Summit in 2013. This was advertised by the Commission as the Success Summit of the European Partnership. There's no need for detail on the summit outcome. But the outcome struck us as puzzling, given what we understood to be the nature of power in Europe. As you may remember, there were 6 potential candidates for association at the Vilnius Summit. 2 excluded themselves, the Azerbaijan and Belarus. I guess we might say that European values were not particularly popular with Mr. Aliyev and Mr. Lukashenko. 2, on the other hand, were very close to signing. Those were Armenia and Ukraine. And 2 were in between. You know, getting there, but not quite. That was, those were Georgia and Moldova. So at Vilnius, or just prior to Vilnius, of course, Armenia and then Ukraine effectively disappeared. So the top 2 knocked themselves out. Largely because of Russian resistance to the partnership process. So effectively, the 6 original candidates turned into 2 candidates, Georgia and Moldova. And since, of course, the summit needed to be successful, agreement with Georgia and Moldova was accelerated. The conclusion, the preliminary conclusion that my colleague and I drew from this was that the European Union was a European neighborhood policy and the partnership were poorly conceived. And those policies also contained significant risks for the European Union, but also, by the way, for the partners. And that related, in our view, to a misunderstanding of the nature of the game in the neighborhood and a misperception of the balance of power. The topic of this presentation has 3 key concepts. One is neighborhood, the second is normative power, and the third is contestation. I'd like to make a few remarks about each of these. And I apologize, in my spare time, I am a gardener. I like to plant and grow things, and I like landscape design. So this metaphor will appear at several points here. Neighborhood, as a concept, implies proximity. My neighbor's garden is his garden, my garden is my garden, but we're next to each other. Neighborhood does not imply formal unity. I'm not taking down the fence. It does, however, suggest shared interest. What my neighbor does in his garden affects me, and my quality of life, and vice versa. That creates potential for cooperation and friendship. It also creates a potential for conflict and enmity. Relations among neighbors, moreover, can be equal or they can be hierarchical. They can also involve claims to ownership, whose neighborhood is it. Now, as I understand it, the European neighborhood policy, out of which the Eastern Partnership grew, out of which Vilnius emerged, the European neighborhood policy was a policy towards its neighbors. It was written in Brussels. It is not the neighbors' policy towards Europe. It was not written in Kiev or in Tbilisi or leaving aside Minsk, which, as it turns out, wisely doesn't want to get messed up in disputes between its neighbors. It was also not written in Moscow. Thinking about Moscow, Brussels, in its view of Europe, doesn't really like fences. Its policy towards wider Europe has been construed to be inclusive. And it seems to think that the neighbors should all follow the wisdom of the European Union and the European Commission. Russia, on the other hand, thinking about fences again, Russia likes fences. It believes, as we say in England, that good fences make good neighbors. It also believes that the eastern neighbors are on the Russian side of the fence. It believes, finally, that European security depends on the European Union and NATO not messing around in Russia's backyard. So, what we have here is a divergent view of neighborhood, a neighborhood where you can have cooperation based on shared interests, or a neighborhood based on about conflict, based on divergent interests. My second concept in this presentation is power. Those of you who have the misfortune to be specialists in international relations will know that power is one of the most problematic concepts in our field. We all talk about power, we throw power around here and there, but if you ask people what exactly they mean, and the discussion becomes unproductive. Basically, it's simple. In politics, power is the capacity of A to get B to do something that B would not otherwise choose to do. That is an application of power. Power can be coercive. If you do something that I don't like, I will hurt you. This is how, in my parents' generation, we used to deal with very small children. You couldn't reason with them, so you punished them if they got out of love. Secondly, power can be persuasive. If you do something I want you to do, then you will benefit from it. It's in your interest to do it. It's aligning incentives. Now, the tools of power can be force, it can be conditionality, and they can be socialization. Georgia has the fortunate or unfortunate history of having experienced all three in the last 25 years. The issue of what power is relates to the second problematic question in my field, which is what is the relationship between materiality, material things, money, guns, and ideas. The power of ideas lies in the capacity to persuade others that your ideas are good for them. Ideas on forms of political organization, on the economy, on dispute resolution, on justice and fairness. These are things, these are ideas that the other side should want and therefore adopt and comply with. Normative power exists in the supposed universality of Western notions of democracy and liberal systems. And it has been pursued through conditionality and socialization in the neighborhood. It is likely to work when the targets of this exercise of power view the values to be legitimate and desirable. When partners identify European norms as theirs. If partners don't think that way, then you get contestation. And that's my third major line of argument, contestation. There are effectively two types of contestation of European neighborhood policy in this region. One is resistance in the target states themselves, the partners. For example, when European values are not congruent with local cultural and social traditions, one encounters popular resistance. I'm still getting over, by way of example, I think it was the 2012 demonstration in Freedom Square down the road here on the Day of Solidarity regarding sexual discrimination, where 200 sorry? 2013, yeah, you know, as you get older, all of the years sort of mix and match. And maybe somewhere between 100 and 200 demonstrators showed up to express their solidarity, and several tens of thousands of people showed up to express their view that these values were alien to Georgia. It's not just popular resistance to European values. it's also resistance by political elites. Resistance to, in some instances in the neighborhood, Belarus comes to mind, Azerbaijan comes to mind, leave aside Russia coming to mind. A resistance to democratization, the rule of law, transparency, accountability, and pluralism in political process. The second kind of resistance encountered, or contestation encountered with respect to the neighborhood policy is, of course, the resistance of the major regional power, Russia. Russia sees the proliferation of European values to be a threat to its domestic stability. Those of you who are old enough to remember Putin's response to the Orange Revolution in Ukraine in 2004. Moreover, Europe is not seen to be a collaborator in a cooperative game, but as a geopolitical threat to the Russian state, to Russian culture and values, and to Russian influence and control of this region. What Europe sees as an inclusive effort to foster a stable, peaceful, prosperous, and democratic Green States, I'm quoting from the European Security Strategy there, is seen in Russia as a zero-sum competition for power and territory. So, leaving aside the terms of reference of this relationship and turning to underlying issues involving the attempt to apply normative power in the region by the European Union. One underlying issue is a divergent understanding of the nature of the region's international relations. Are these relations cooperative or competitive? We would like to think that they should be and are cooperative, and Russia sees them as competitive. Another question is, do we see the project as being one Europe, or in fact, two Europes? Now, normative power is most likely to be effective when there is no substantial resistance to the values and incentives embodied in it. Soft power. Where these are contested, to be effective, normative power needs to be accompanied by substantial investment of resources. For example, material investment in partners, deterrence of threats to partners, and also, arguably, the incentive of membership in the club. An incentive which has not, by the way, been clearly articulated, to my knowledge, ever in the history of European neighborhood policy. I'm reminded of Romano Prodi, who at the end of 2002, in the early discussions around the neighborhood policy, gave a talk at the Collège d'Europe, in which he said, you know, what Europe needs is not more members, but more cooperation in the neighborhood. That position has never officially been changed. Now, the second issue here is the balance of power. In a cooperative, interdependent European system with no fences, the EU has the advantage in terms of power. But we are in a regional system where the structure and rules of the game are contested. And in that game, Russia has the regional advantage in a competitive system where force is considered a legitimate instrument of policy. We all, I'm sorry to say, were in Georgia, we all recall what Giles quoted Joseph Stalin as saying about the Pope. And when they were contemplating invasion of Poland in 1943-44, Vyacheslav Molotov asked Stalin, yes, but the Pope wouldn't like that. Stalin said, how many divisions does the Pope have? I think it makes the point. The other advantage that Russia has is that Russia is actually in this region in a way that the European Union is not. I don't need to remind the Georgians of that simple geographical fact. Russia has the regional advantage in a competitive system where force is considered a legitimate instrument of policy, as I said. Moreover, and finally, if you compare how the EU and Russia view the Eastern neighborhood, the Eastern neighborhood is far more significant as a priority in Russian policy than it is in European Union policy. A third issue, this gets us, since we're talking about the EU, to almost my conclusion, Chairman. The EU itself. The EU faces a lot of problems arising in its effort to act effectively, resolutely, and determinedly in this region. One is that the Eastern neighborhood is one of many policies on issues on the table. One of many issues that demand political commitment and material resources. Among others that are currently delighting my colleagues in Brussels at the moment are Brexit, the migration crisis, economic weakness in the Eurozone, the rise of populism in Europe, in the European Union itself, and as most of these has been mentioned, there's one other that has also been mentioned, the democratic deficit in the European Union. And all of these issues, not surprisingly, since almost all of them are internal, attract a higher level of commitment and policy attention and resources than the European neighborhood policy. In other words, the neighborhood policy is sort of squeezed out. The second issue with regard to the EU is the states members of the EU don't actually agree much on the neighborhood. You know, for example, if we think about attitudes towards Russia, compare Poland, Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania on one end to, say, Germany and Italy on the other hand. And then there's this great middle, which includes, for the moment, Britain, which is sort of uncertain about the whole business. But there's also disagreement on deepening cooperation with partner states, including associate members of the EU. The visa question came up, the visa liberalization question came up. This was, the reason for delay was essentially disagreement among member states in the Union once the technical issues have been resolved. One can infer, if there's already significant disagreement on how much effort to put into the neighborhood and how many resources to expend in the neighborhood, one can infer that if there were further significant political initiatives in the EU on the neighborhood, the conflict within the Union would increase. One thing Brussels does not want at the moment, I guess, is an increase in internal conflict in the EU. And the effect, consequently, is a tendency to inertia. Finally, on the EU, and this gets to what my colleague and I included in that article, it's about the institutional and constitutional structure of the European Union and the question of whether it can actually be an effective foreign policy actor, a quasi-state. Europe has claimed that it is a global power, and the CFSP and CSDP are manifestations of its effort to act in the international system on the basis of the But to actualize power potential takes an appropriate institutional form. You need institutions that can apply your power potential. There's no shortage of power potential in Europe. Look at population, look at GDP, look at military expenditure. It's all substantial. The question is, can the Union put these resources together in order to pursue an effective projection policy? The argument that Professor Menona and I make in the article is that underlying all of the issues about the EU I've already been through is a constitutional one. Specifically, Europe is not institutionally equipped to compete in a geopolitical, global, and regional system characterized by great power, political, and military competition. Now, in 1990, when the Charter of Paris was signed, it was reasonable to assume that that rather traditional pattern in international relations of the use of force and great power competition was on in Europe, and we were moving towards one Europe whole and free, to quote the Charter. That no longer seems to be the case. And therefore, policies designed on these assumptions become problematic. Now, why is the EU less well suited to competing in a geopolitical international reality as opposed to a reality of globalization and interdependence? Political and military influence in world politics depend on the state's capacity to extract resources sufficient to fund deterrence and defense. Okay. The EU does not have that capacity. If you look at the United States federal budget as a share of GDP, that's the central location of power in the United States. And you compare it to the portion of the European Union budget as a percentage of EU GDP, you find a marked difference, unsurprisingly. So the EU is short of resources to be able to deploy in pursuit of foreign policy. But it also lacks central authority over its external actions. CFSP, CSDP are effectively council matters, or actually, because of shared competences, they are nation-state matters. So, at the end of this rather unfortunate picture, what do we conclude? The European application of normative power in the region might work in an uncontested, postmodern landscape of globalization and universal values. But it is not suited to great power competition or territory and influence, which is apparently the game that the Russians are playing. It turns out that the liminal space between Europe and Russia is not Europe's eastern neighborhood, but it's a contested space. The Russians say it is their neighborhood. It's contested in terms of territoriality, influence, and power. And underlying these material elements of contestation, there is a contested understanding of the nature of global politics. If Europe is living in the 21st century in terms of its behavior in international relations, Russia is living in the late 19th century. Georgia 2009, the war, which was mentioned this morning, the Vilnius summit that I've spoken of, and leave aside the intervention in Ukraine and the annexation of Crimea make the point of the difference. The enlargement agenda for the EU, the enlargement into this space, may not ever have been on the table for the neighborhood, but at the moment it is definitely not on the table. Now that may change. we tend to live in the present and to discount possibilities in the future. Things may change. But for now, no. I would start with the thought that we tend to associate Europeanization with the European Union. That is not necessarily a helpful way to look at it. After all, as was pointed out this morning, Georgian thinking about Europe, Georgian thoughts about Europeanization predate the European Union, and I have no doubt that if the European Union suddenly collapsed, God forbid, Europeanization would remain anyway. And it also points to a second conclusion. There are different forms of Europe. Okay? There is Eurozone Europe. There is EU Europe. But there is also the form of Europe occupied by partner members. There is the form of Europe occupied by Norway, Iceland, Switzerland, and those three are soon to be joined, I also regret to say, by the United Kingdom. And I think that's actually a nice way to move to a discussion of localism, because localism, local interpretations of Europeanness, don't just apply in the neighborhood, they also apply where I live. Thank you.
Thank you.